Thanks for tuning in to the Women's Vibrancy Code, a podcast dedicated to helping women move from exhausted to energized, balance their hormones, and feeling turned on by their life, their lover, and themselves. I'm your host, Maraya Brown. I'm a Yale and functional medicine trained women's health expert, midwife, mom, keynote speaker, and self-made entrepreneur. I'm the founder of my signature program, the Women's Vibrancy Code. So sit back, relax, and let's chat about your energy, hormones, libido, and embracing your feminine power. Oh, and you might want to have pen and paper to take some notes on some of these episodes. Maraya Brown here. I wanted to talk today about vulnerability. Specifically, I was just on a trip in Mexico with a number of other women, and twice I had conversations with women that pretty much said, I would rather swim with shark than be vulnerable with other women. And I went, wow, this is a thing. Yes, vulnerability, specifically women and our relationship with being vulnerable around other women. Okay, so for those of you in the Facebook world, I already said this. For those of you listening in the podcast, the background. I went on a solo trip to Mexico. I think it was last week, maybe the week before. And it was lovely. It was quiet. I allowed myself to be bored, and which is good medicine for me. And two separate occasions, I had conversations with women. And in both scenarios, they said they would rather swim with shark than be vulnerable with women. And I went, wow. That's really fascinating to me. I don't relate to that, but I have my own past experiences and things that do make me, for me, I feel afraid to ask for help. You know, I was raised in a scenario where I learned self-resilience and not to ask for help. But I don't have past experiences or experiences that hold me back necessarily from being vulnerable with women. I love being with women. I've held women's circles and ran women's circles since 2007. I've been a midwife attending births where women are exceptionally vulnerable. I've run the women's health and Planned Parenthood in places where obviously women are very vulnerable. I've taught childbirth education classes. I run women's retreats. I have a year-long program that is all around women really saying, I'm ready to look in the mirror. I'm ready to create the experience I want and accomplish my goals and create the things. And I know that the creation of all the goals, the checking off the boxes, the certifications do not really move the needle of who I am. And I think that if we want to move the needle around who I am, then we get to look at who I be and who I be in the midst of vulnerability. So I'm looking forward to getting into this topic. I've prepped, so I went and found some statistics and some quotes. So I want to get into this. And obviously it's around fear. And let's just get right into it. So let's talk some statistics. About 36% of people in the US have fear of dental treatments, with 12% having an extreme fear. I've had women say to me, they would rather go to the dentist than give birth. And yet 36% of people have a fear of going to the dentist. Okay. Public speaking anxiety is a classified DSM-5 social anxiety disorder. It is reported as prevalent as up to 30% of the general population. Okay. So more than 30% afraid of the dentist, up to 30% of the general population afraid of public speaking. Up to 22% of women worldwide experience fear of the birth process at some point during pregnancy. And studies suggest as many as 50% of women in the US experience fear. It's not just first-time mothers who feel this way. So half of the women in the United States have some fear of giving birth. And then shark. More than half of Americans are absolutely terrified of shark. And up to 38% are so afraid of shark being in the ocean, they won't get in the ocean. And yet, More than half are afraid of shark. 38% won't go in the ocean. And there are women that tell me they would rather swim with shark than be vulnerable with other women. How many people experience fear of vulnerability? I don't know. I couldn't find it, but I obviously did a deep dive into Brene Brown's work. This is a lot of what she does. I think of her as the expert of vulnerability, and I couldn't necessarily find stats, but I'm sure it's a lot. And so in this episode, I want to offer some food for thought, some things that make you go, some steps that maybe you can start taking, and just a little bit of a gentle nudge, a gentle push for you to consider to try on a new way, to try on a little bit outside of your comfort zone, specifically in relationship with women. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why. So what do we fear? If we expose ourselves, we will lose love, respect, and acceptance. That's generally the core of it. And for some reason, especially women, in groups of women, there is old stories, old trauma that shows up around losing love, respect, and acceptance. And yet, true emotional connection requires honesty and trust. And these elements entail a sense of vulnerability. So we must be willing to show ourselves to receive the benefits of intimacy. So we're wanting intimacy. Everyone wants to be seen and heard and feel loved and respected and accepted. And yet we hold ourselves back. Some of us hold ourselves back to different degrees in different settings. And fascinatingly enough, we aren't born afraid of vulnerability. Just look at an infant or a young child. They'll cry at anything. They cry if they need something. They cry if they're feeling something, no matter how exhausted their caregiver feels. Children depend on exhibiting vulnerability to survive. And yet, at some point, we shift and we hold it all together. And we go, well, I'll share vulnerability, but only in this setting. I'm part of I'm writing a book this year. And so I'm part of a book writing group. And it's so fascinating. Even this morning, I'm going, oh my gosh, this is a 2.5-hour call. Just resisting it. Like, that's a big chunk of time. And can we just get things done? I'm looking at all the things that I would rather be doing. And really I went, oh, this is me in this setting, resisting digging in. And what I want to urge you to consider is the digging in, our ability to quiet down, look inside, and allow ourselves to be seen, allow ourselves to be felt, is where the juiciness resides. And where the juiciness resides, for those of you that are business owners, is where the bottom line increases. It's where the ROI shows up. Because people remember not what we said or what we did, but how we made them feel. Anyway, I could go on and on. So over time, we develop this fear through various life experiences. The more we are taught that vulnerability is dangerous or wrong, the less likely we are to embrace it. So I checked out the website Tailor Matched International. So for matchmaking, for those of you looking for deep relationships and matchmaking, says, first of all, let's look at our current ideas around vulnerability. So 2 questions. And if you have pen and paper, I encourage you to write this down. If you're listening to the podcast after I read these 2 questions, I encourage you to write them down, push pause, and actually allow yourself some time to journal out your answers. So question number 1, what images come to mind when you hear the word vulnerability? Okay, perhaps you imagine there will be tears, embarrassment, an angry reaction. Or do you imagine closeness, hugs, eye contact, hot chocolate, pillow talk? So what images come to mind when you hear the word vulnerability? And I want to take that one step forward, specifically when you think about being vulnerable with women. Okay, question number 2 is, What words are attached to it for you? For some of us, it could be, if I'm vulnerable, I'm weak. It's scary. It's too feminine or gross. Or maybe you think of it as strength, power, intimacy. I mean, as a midwife, when I've caught hundreds of babies and I've attended lots and lots of births. When a woman allows herself to fully surrender and really trust and be in that vulnerable space, oh my gosh, it's when her power shows up. And the birth is so much more graceful and abundant and fun. Some of you may know Masterclass. I love Masterclass. I was a member of it for a year. And Masterclass says the fear of vulnerability is a feeling of dread about being emotionally open with others. People who fear vulnerability often strive for perfectionism. Okay. So anybody out there, a recovering perfectionist? Okay. They close themselves off to friends and keep loved ones at an arm's length distance. Right. And listen, I have my own versions of these, right? The perfectionism of I'm afraid to hire and depend on someone else. No. I've got my Yale education. I've got this. I know women, clients of mine, who are afraid to allow anyone else to watch their children. For them, it's outside the confines of perfectionism, and it feels really, really vulnerable. For some women, they're afraid to be seen, to cry, to share deep, intimate stuff because of past experiences. And so instead, what becomes easy is we go into our more masculine energy, that push, logic, get it done, make sure it fits inside the box, and strive for perfectionism. Okay. Often these nuances of fear and vulnerability can come from past trauma. So, 60% of women have experienced some form of childhood sexual abuse. So fear of being touched, fear of rejection. I think about myself in middle school and high school. I grew up with kind of a disjointed upbringing. There was a number of divorces and my mom left, and I felt really sad. And I judged my body and didn't treat my body very well, and didn't feel super loved. So instead I worked and I was the president of everything. And on the surface, everybody might have thought that everything was great with Maraya. But behind closed doors, I was really sad and I was very alone. And the reason I bring this up is a couple times I brought it up to girlfriends, and their response was that, wow, that's intense. It's actually so heavy and so sad. It's too much for me. I can't be friends with you. And so then I developed a fear of letting people know the dark side, of letting people in, fear of rejection, right? And so that is one thing I've had to recover from, to be able to be safe, really showing the ways in which I'm great and the ways in which I'm really not. And the times when I yell, and the times when I can get mean, and the times when I don't know what I'm doing. And imposter syndrome is loud and clear, right? A lot of this has to do with our familial upbringing. Did you grow up being told you don't show your emotion, you don't ask for help, women are better to be seen, not heard, whatever it may be. So then we have these reactions to vulnerability. Maybe it's with your sisters, your girlfriends, whatever it may be. Okay. And then, like I said, perfectionism. So overcoming the fear of vulnerability can strengthen romantic relationships and friendships, increase self-awareness, and improve confidence. So engaging in conversations with new people, trying new things. Sometimes that can be really vulnerable. I'm going to try a new thing. I'm going to try to do the same thing, but slightly different. I'm going to step outside and go talk to a new person, right? I might put someone in this box of how I expect them to be, but we can't hate someone close up. That's what Brene Brown says. So I'm going to try to step outside and pick up a conversation. I'm going to try keeping a journal and actually express my feelings. These are all ways that we can start the process of overcoming the fear of vulnerability and instead promote self-love and personal growth. And what I see with the women that work with me within the Women's Vibrancy Code, which is my signature program, or women that come to the Women's Vibrancy retreats. For those of you listening, I do have a retreat in March in Southern Oregon. It begins March 9th, and there's currently 2 spots left. And the Women's Vibrancy doors are often open. It's by application. But what do I see in that? Women come in and yes, they want to have more energy. They want to address their hormones. They want to sleep better. They want to feel more light and less bloated and be the weight and have the body composition that they're looking for. They want better, stronger immune systems, all of that stuff. And then they realize, oh my gosh, the things that I've been struggling with behind closed doors, I'm not alone, because they're hearing the stories of other women. And they're in a safe container where now we get to allow ourselves to be seen, and we get to show ourselves and hold space for other women showing themselves in a really safe container, and always at the pace that we're ready for. But then what I watch is women come alive. They go, oh my gosh, this is potent. I'm seeing myself. I'm loving myself more. I'm feeling more strong. I'm feeling more supported than I've ever said. I'm saying things out loud I've never said out loud before. And then they go, I'm going to move. I'm going to quit my job and get a new one. I'm going to really dig into my relationship, and my relationship is going to have a facelift. I'm going to go meet up with these girlfriends, and we are building deep, intimate relationships. And they feel the richness of life. It's so potent. It's so powerful to watch. Okay, so despite what some may think, says Brené Brown, vulnerability is our most accurate way to measure courage. Let me say this again. Vulnerability is our most accurate way to measure courage, according to Brené Brown. She says vulnerability allows them to assess fearlessness, and we can measure how brave you are by how vulnerable you're willing to be. So once again, what if vulnerability is actually a sign of bravery and courage? And when we flip the coin over and see it through a different lens, does that change the perspective for you? If you're someone, when I ask the questions around what words and images show up for you, if you in the past have seen vulnerability and sharing your emotions as weak, as feminine in a negative way, as complaining, as dark, victim-y, it can go in that direction. I think it's a really fine line. And I'm going to talk later on about what vulnerability is not, right? It's not just playing the victim. Okay. But it also is not a sign of weakness. Okay. Tony Robbins says, I love this quote. It's one of my very favorite quotes. If you follow me much, I post it often. Tony Robbins says, the quality of your life is in direct proportion to the amount of uncertainty you can comfortably deal with. So when we can stretch our ability to deal with uncertainty, i.e. vulnerability, and we get clear with to what degree of uncertainty am I comfortable with, the more we can expand that and stretch that, it actually has a direct correlation to our quality of life in direct proportion. And I believe that our quality of life is also in direct proportion to our abundance, our ability to attract that which we love. We want to attract love and belonging and beauty and energy and money and relationships and all the things. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? I think it's all in direct relationship, and it all comes back to where am I holding myself back from being seen and being felt? Where am I holding myself back from allowing myself to be vulnerable? And once again, in this setting, I'm talking specifically about with women. So I started facilitating women's circles in 2007. And it's so fun. At the beginning, I would always make sure that there was a woman from each generation. So there's a woman in her 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. It was so beautiful to be able to circle together every month and have conversations across generational lines. Because as a healthcare provider, as a midwife, I'm privy to a lot of very private conversations behind that closed door. And women would come to me with their struggles and their woes about their libido and their incontinence and sexually transmitted infections and fear around their health and relationship with aging and feeling unhappy in their relationships, abortions, miscarriages. I mean, all the incontinence, vaginal smells, all of these really intimate conversations. But often what I was hearing through my lens is we as women have lost the space, the red tent, so to speak, where we have our aunties, our mothers, our grandmothers to talk with about this stuff. And so women exist in a silo, doing it all alone, feeling like they're the only ones, not knowing who to talk to about it, because we have, for some reason, many women have developed this fear of vulnerability with other women. And so then they go and struggle in silence. So they would come to me as their women's healthcare provider and behind closed doors ask these questions. And I went, okay. How can we create a space where women can start realizing I'm not the only one? And so for those of you that have been with me since Beyond the Red Tent, that's where Beyond the Red Tent started, was to create a virtual space across generational lines where women could share and ask and really dig into these kind of super vulnerable questions, the taboo topics that we often don't talk about, but they need to be talked about, okay? They need to be talked about. And then Beyond the Red Tent became the Women's Vibrancy Code, and I pivoted. And so now I get to do what I do. And all of my work as a women's health provider is online. I guess not all of it, because I have the in-person retreats too. So let's talk about sisterhood. Did you know that sisterhood, having a group of women that you can be vulnerable with, is actually good for your health? Okay. When we create these spaces, we don't feel so alone, which will often impact a reduction in depression, will help you sleep better, will help you feel safe, which then impacts your adrenal well-being and your thyroid well-being and your digestion. Okay. It's actually going to help down the road increase dopamine, so you'll be more productive at work. You'll lower your blood pressure. I mean, there's so many byproducts of feeling heard and seen and safe, showing up courageously and with bravery and a safe connection, especially when we as womb holders, women, connect with one another and share with one another. Because we relate to one another. We're circular in how we think and how we hold space for one another. We're very intuitive. And when we allow ourselves that space, what I see is women come alive. Sure, you could go, and I flew first class to Mexico for this trip. It was so luxurious. And the woman that I sat next to was heading down to go scuba dive with bull sharks. And she's telling me about all these trips she has. She's planned trips every month for the next few months, going to do really what might seem vulnerable and brave things. But they're all solo. They're all kind of adrenaline rush, exciting, like, oh my gosh, so much bravery. And yet in her scenario, it literally like made her palms sweat to think about the idea of allowing herself to be seen by other human beings and showing her vulnerability from an emotional standpoint. But what if instead that was what we really needed? Sure, you can also go scuba dive with bull shark and go skydiving. What I'm saying is I think the richness in how we see ourselves in the mirror and we look at who we be, not just perpetually moving the goalpost to get other, check the box, cross the T, dot the I. That's not really getting us the fulfillment. I mean, some of my clients, it's like, okay, they finally cross over the 7-figure mark and there they are. They're still left with themselves. They thought that there would be this like big moment where the clouds parted and the angels sang, and now they're 7-figure earners. And yet here they are still left with themselves. You finish the degree, get married, you're still left with you. So what if instead we created safe places where we could be heard and seen? And I think women need women. We get to learn from each other, realize that we're not the only ones. And then we create community, specifically when you tap into places like women's circles, the Women's Vibrancy Code, coming into my free workshop. For those of you watching this before February 22nd, 23rd, that timing, I'm doing a free workshop this week that's specifically for the vibrant CEO, for the female that wants to be the trailblazer, the game changer, and wants to feel spectacular and actually say, yes, I want to move the goalpost. Yes, I want to accomplish big things. Yes, I want to be the CEO of my health and my relationship and my life. And I know that in order to do that, it means boundary setting, it means prioritizing myself, and it means looking in the mirror at who I be. I was just at a mastermind in Utah a few weeks ago, and there was a gentleman up in front who, I think he sold his business to Walmart for $2 billion. And the person interviewing him said, what did you do? Like, what became your focus? When here you were, you knew Walmart was buying this. Where did you spend your time and energy? And he said, I focused on who I be. He said, yeah, I went and bought a Versace robe and, those things. But he said, I up-leveled my health coaching. I up-leveled my mindset coaching. And yes, there needed to be restructuring in team and systems and SOPs and KPIs and all that stuff. But he said, most important was who I be. Because in that process of major up-leveling and changing, for someone, like you think about people who win the lottery, especially in that scenario, it's the same person. And now they're confronted with, who do I be in the midst of this? So my call to action for you, my CTA, is for you to be willing to say, this is not just about the things that I do, the accomplishments that I have, but who am I being? And in what ways am I showing up courageously with vulnerability and honesty and softness and pause, specifically with other women? So once again, Brene Brown asserts that vulnerability is the, quote, birthplace of things like love and joy. And in the feeling of joy, we dress rehearse tragedy. So let me say this again. Many of you maybe heard her story where she talks about tucking her kids in to sleep at night and just feeling, I can relate to this so much, just feeling the overwhelm of how much I love my children. Oh my gosh. Tuck them in and give them a kiss. And I just feel like there's nothing like it. And yet, how many people in that moment, in that split second, will dress rehearse some form of tragedy? What if this horrible thing happens? Now, hopefully we catch ourselves and we don't go down that rabbit hole. Instead, we allow ourselves to relish in the feeling of love and joy. But if vulnerability is the birthplace of things like love and joy, and in moments of joy, we tend to dress rehearse tragedy, it makes sense why we fear vulnerability, because we feel really exposed. Are we really ready to feel the love and joy that we say that we want? Right? Does imposter syndrome step in? Is that upper limiting becoming a thing where we go, oh my gosh, I say that I want love, but really, am I ready for it? And instead, we dress rehearse tragedy and we go down that rabbit hole and then we go, no, never mind. I don't need the love. I don't need the vulnerability. Brene Brown also talks about the advantages of vulnerability at work. So she says, no vulnerability equates to no creativity. And no tolerance for failure equates to no innovation. And it's literally that simple. For those of you that are building businesses, you work in a work environment, even in your own home, in that working environment, if we do not have the capacity to practice vulnerability, stretch our ability to experience vulnerability, at the same time, we are not stretching our ability to cultivate creativity. Okay? No vulnerability includes no creativity. If we are caught up in our perfectionism, holding the steering wheel, gripping it, because there's no tolerance for failure, then that also means that there's no innovation. And to be willing to let go of our perfectionism and allow some expanded tolerance for failure opens up the doors for innovation. But if you're not willing to fail, you can't innovate. And if you're not willing to build a vulnerable culture, it will not be a culture that creates. And I say this out loud, and I need to listen to the words myself as I build a team and team culture, and we're spread out and we all have different lives, and there's a single mama and someone in the Philippines and someone in Colombia and someone in Rhode Island. And here we are trying to pop on Zoom. And how do we create this culture where, yes, we get things done. We come from a servant's heart and we believe in the mission behind the Women's Vibrancy Code. But there's also expansive space for creativity and vulnerability and a tolerance for failure and innovation. And what I want to say out loud, bringing it back to with women, oh my gosh, when you get women together in a brainstorming space, especially if we're all in our like week 2, week 3 of our menstrual cycle, where that's like the juicy time where we're so creative and we want to be in the brainstorming space. We want to put it into action. If we can circle up during that time, because so many of us end up mirroring our menstrual cycles, especially if we work together, and do it vulnerably, oh my gosh, there comes the creativity and the innovation. So Brene Brown says vulnerability is hard and it's scary and it feels dangerous, but it's not as hard, scary, or dangerous as getting to the end of our lives and having to ask ourselves, what if I would have shown up? Because here's the flip side. I've attended deaths. My husband is a physical therapist. He's worked with all of his patients for the past 20, 25 years, have been in their 80s, 90s, 100s. And so he's been there sitting with them as they talk through end of life in the kind of final chapters. And that's the thing. I think the worst is for someone to say, what if I would have shown up differently? What if I would have said? Or for those of us that have lost loved ones, how often do you say, what if I would have said I love you? What if I would have shown up courageously to say that thing, ask for that thing, say I'm sorry, ask for forgiveness, offer forgiveness? So yes, vulnerability is hard and it's scary and it feels dangerous, but it's not as hard, scary, or dangerous as getting to the end of our lives, asking ourselves those questions. So instead, we show up, we allow ourselves to be seen, and we answer the call to courage because we know we're worth it. And we know that we're worth being brave and we're worth having deep relationships where we really feel seen. Like it makes me think of the movie Avatar when she says, I see you. That. What if on one side is this fear of, no, I'm going to hold back. No, I'm not going to go join some women's vibrancy retreat or women's vibrancy code. That means I have to be vulnerable with other women, and that's not safe. And I've been wronged and they're going to backstab me. What if on the flip side, we showed up fully ourselves and we chose a different story? And we rewrote the stories of our past and the past trauma and experiences that we've had. And instead, we're digging into these rich, rich conversations, feeling totally seen and heard and loved. And we have absolute creativity and innovation and bravery and courage. And now our quality of life feels more expansive. And then we pour that into the children that we raise and the businesses that we build and the ripple effect that we have in the world, the communities that we serve, because a rising tide lifts all boats. And so I feel really called. I feel like I have a lot of passion in this conversation, but I really am not passionate about it. I believe a rising tide lifts all boats. And so me as my boat, I get to rise as your tide comes up. And I believe that shows up when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. Okay, so Taylor Matched International once again says, vulnerability is the ability to share how you really feel with the sole intention of sharing, whilst knowing you cannot control the outcome or response. Okay, so they say, why is vulnerability so attractive? It enhances honest communication and intimacy. It builds intention and connection. Having the strength to consciously show up with your emotions has actually been statistically shown to be seen as more sexy in the dating world. So what if we chose to show up with the intention of sharing and let go of the outcome of how it's received? Let go of the outcome. I say the color blue, I have no idea what color just popped into your head, but I'm sure it's a different color blue. And my guess is my relationship with the color blue and the stories that I think of with the blue dress that my 5-year-old is wearing right now that she just got in the mail that's a size 7, but she's a size 5 for the wedding. Like, of course, that wasn't the story that popped up for you, but what is the story that pops up for you? And so when I share, I don't take responsibility for what you hear, how you receive it, but I take responsibility for me and how I'm being and who I'm being as I serve greatly in the world as the trailblazer that I am. So let's talk a little bit about what vulnerability is not. Okay. Vulnerability is not having expectations of what the other person will give you in return for your exposure. It is not posting on Facebook for all to see and displaying your vulnerable story. It is, on the other hand, sharing in an intimate setting when you're truly going to be heard and seen, not just on a public Facebook page. Even for me right now, sharing this in a podcast and on the Facebook, I could share a vulnerable story. Is that truly vulnerability? No. Sharing it with someone who really knows me and sees me, there's where vulnerability shows up. Vulnerability is not opening up to gain sympathy from another person to lure them into bed or to coerce them to stay with you. It is not hoping that by sharing your truth, your partner or friend or the person you're sharing with will be able to, quote unquote, fix you. That is not vulnerability. 2 more that it's not. Vulnerability is not relying on the other person to have the answers, and it is not sharing trauma as an excuse for your actions, lack of action. Okay. So if you didn't get something done, rather than just simply saying, I'm sorry, when we go into this vulnerable story of our trauma as an excuse, rather than taking responsibility. Okay. So instead, it's courageous, it's honest, it's intimate. It's when we really feel heard and seen by those that have our best interest at heart and believe in us more than we believe in ourselves at times. I talked a little bit about Beyond the Red Tent. I think the Red Tent is a space that's intentionally co-created for women specifically to come together, share, connect, authentically be. They are often spaces for women to share their stories, to rest, gain strength from being together and supporting one another. And for those of you that have not participated in something like that, if you've not been to an in-person women's retreat, if you've not been to a part of a program or a women's circle or a place where women consistently over time in small groups, like, I think of it as a max of 30 women. Even that can be a lot. A group of women that are dedicated to each month gathering together to be seen. I think about the Mother-Daughter Project. It's that. And this red tent, as its title is indicated, the red tent is one of the most important and recurring images, specifically in the book, The Red Tent. So if you've not read it, it's worth reading. And it's kind of where when we started Beyond the Red Tent, it was inspired from the book. Okay, so I'm just about done. I'm going to finish up. I want to talk about some tips to be more vulnerable, and hopefully it's helpful for you. There are 11, okay? That does not mean you're going to take on all 11. I encourage you to listen, pick 1 or 2, and just give them a try. Just give it a try to start taking steps. You might want to write some of these down, but I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. By no means is the expectation to do it all at once, okay? So number 1 is give yourself some compassion. Remind yourself of how brave you are to be vulnerable, to even try to consider on the possibility, no matter how small it seems at the moment. Even if it's just trying something new, hiring someone, letting go of some perfectionism, trying a new food. No matter how small it is, give yourself some compassion that I'm being brave. I'm trying something new. Okay. Number 2, identify your needs by learning to check in with yourself regularly. Put your hand on your chest, put your feet on the ground, and allow yourself to take a breath and check in. What do I need? What do I desire? And what do I feel? The more that we're able to ask ourselves those questions and identify it, then it increases the possibility of us being able to have the conversation and relay it in a vulnerable space with whomever we choose to share it with. Number 3, like I said, try something new, such as new food, life experience, conversations that maybe test your limits, spaces where you step outside your comfort zone, spaces where you expand your horizons can allow you to experience more vulnerability and open up to new possibilities. So number 1 is give yourself compassion. Number 3 is try something new. Number 4, avoid focusing on other people's opinions of you. Okay, like I said before, it's their story. Might as well choose a good one. One of my mentors once said, that if somebody's walking down the street and looking at me, I used to tell myself the story, oh, they might be looking at my butt. It's got bigger. Is a booger coming out of my nose? What's going on? She's going, listen, I'm just telling myself a story. If I'm going to tell myself a story, I might as well tell myself the story that, yeah, they're looking at me and I'm damn hot. I'm 65 and I'm still got it, even though I'm walking here with my 30-year-old daughter who's hot as can be. Whatever. We're just telling ourselves stories. So can we avoid focusing on other people's opinions of whatever it is that we're doing? Whatever courageous, brave way that you're showing up vulnerably, shift the story. And don't take their thoughts personally. Their thoughts are their own through their own lens, which is through their own life's experience. Okay. Number 5, applaud, honor, and accept others when they are vulnerable and they are sharing their feelings. Don't get sarcastic. Don't get kind of snippy or gossipy. Allow yourself to take a pause and honor their vulnerability. Because the more that we honor that in them, it increases the ability for us to honor it in ourselves and make the assumption, even though we don't care what other people think, it's still going to increase the assumption that they will give us the same benefit of the doubt and they'll honor our vulnerability as well. Number 6, challenge yourself. Set goals to converse with a new person daily. Share a part of yourself with a loved one. Talk about your feelings more frequently. If you don't know what your feelings are, Google it. Google a list of emotions. I think sad, mad, glad, bad. That's a good start. What am I? Am I sad? Am I mad? Am I bad or angry? Am I glad? And some other version of that. But whatever it is, allow yourself to identify and share those feelings more frequently. And challenge yourself to be more open and expressive in whatever way you see fit. Number 7, give up perfectionism. Number 8, lead with love and generosity. Telling others how special they are and how much they mean to you can make others feel more open and likely to return the favor. When we come from a place of appreciation and gratitude, it's always going to benefit the world. Okay. When we lead with a spirit of kindness and care, it helps people feel more comfortable being vulnerable. And it is vulnerable for us to share that. I think about ho'oponopono. Many people are becoming more familiar with it. Ho'o in Hawaiian is like the process of, pono means to make right. So ho'oponopono, it's 4 statements. I love you. I'm sorry. Thank you. Please forgive me. So can you lead with love and generosity? And today, say to yourself, I love you. I'm sorry. Thank you. Please forgive me. Can you find someone to say that with? I love you. I'm sorry. Thank you. Please forgive me. It's vulnerable and it's awesome. And it's the birthplace of love and joy. Okay, number 9, be in the moment, this moment. Especially when you're showing up vulnerably, not thinking too much about the past and all the past experiences where you've been burned or wronged, not necessarily thinking too far into the future about the domino effect and the repercussions of what it is that you're doing, but just simply being here now in this moment. Number 10, write down what you love about yourself. I have the heat on in my office and I love it to be hot, but my cheeks are getting rosy because it's so hot in here and I need to hydrate. So write down what you love about yourself. One of my first coaches, when I took the leap to go online, and oh my gosh, it was so scary. It was the first big leap I took since the miscarriage. And I was afraid. I was afraid that the rug would get pulled out from under me again. And he had me write down 50 reasons why. 50 reasons why I was spectacular, 50 reasons why I was worthy, 50 reasons why my credentials were spectacular, the transformation I'd created in women, all the things. And when we allow ourselves to write down what we love and appreciate about ourselves, the nice thing about that is often the fear of vulnerability and the propensity towards perfectionism and protection really stems from low self-esteem. So writing down what you love about yourself can increase your confidence, your self-love. All those who am I stories start going away. And instead, we're able to navigate more challenging scenarios. And then if you're ever feeling unsure, you can go revisit what you've written down about what you love and appreciate about yourself. And then the last thing is consider applying for the Women's Vibrancy Code, possibly coming to one of the women's retreats that I hold. If you're not familiar with the Women's Vibrancy Code, just reach out. It's a spectacular container of women that are hungry to feel vibrant, hungry to be the powerhouse women in the world, and show up to allow it to be the year that transforms the trajectory of the rest of their life and show up for one another in the amount of time that we all have. We all have full lives, but to look at not just who I'm being, but how I'm being. And yes, accomplishing goals, and yes, addressing our hormones and our physiology, but allowing ourselves to give ourselves permission to feel spectacular. And then the Women's Vibrancy Retreat, depending on when you're listening to this, I have one in March 2023 here in Oregon. There's one end of July in Park City, Utah. And then I have one February 2024 in Hawaii. And they are intimate, they are vulnerable, and they are spectacular. And I would love to have you. So I will make sure that I put all the links to all the things. And with that, I'm just appreciative. I'm appreciative of you being here, sharing this time together. And hopefully it's giving you some food for thought, possibly some new courage to show up a little bit differently. And I would love to hear from you. Reach out anytime. You can send me a DM. It's Maraya Brown on Facebook. It's Maraya Brown on Instagram. I'm not really present on LinkedIn, although I will. You've got the Women's Vibrancy Code podcast. You've got marayabrown.com, and just reach out in whatever way you can. I'm happy to serve. And I think you're awesome.